Hi, my name is Cynthia Gagnon. I'm very happy today to introduce my colleague, Marie-Ève Lamontagne. This is our first webinar on knowledge translation in the NMD4C network. We thought about hosting 3 webinars this year to gradually help researchers, clinicians, to increase their ability to develop a successful KT plan in order to make sure that the research that they're doing is actually getting to the people that are meant to receive it, which are ultimately individuals affected by neuromuscular disease, their family, and their organization like hospital and so on. So Marie-Ève Lamontagne is an occupational therapist by background. She is a professor at University Laval and researcher at a rehabilitation research center in Quebec called the CIRIS. She's also always been interested. We've known each other since the postdoctoral fellowship about knowledge translation. And she decided to develop and to devote her career in research about knowledge translation. She's now a junior 1 researcher at FRQS, and she is currently applying for junior 2, and I'm really happy to help her in that endeavor. And now I will let her present you the basics of having a successful KT plan.
Thank you, Cynthia, for this wonderful presentation. You already did my first slide, so I'll jump on the basic faster than I thought. So the plan of the agenda today is mostly to speak about the really basis of the knowledge translation plan, so you can build on that on the future webinar. So today I will be quite happy if you have a clearer idea of what is the knowledge to action or KTA cycle. And if you can choose wisely between integrated and end-of-grant knowledge translation. So I will explain the 2 modes of KT, and you can choose which one suits the best your goal. I want to speak briefly about the challenge of KT in context of heart disease. This is not an easy field to work in KT, but it is one where the knowledge are the most needed. So I hope that you will be able to identify and overcome those challenges faster if we discuss a bit about that. And then I want to feel equipped with some tool to create a good KT plan. So that's what I hope to achieve in a few minutes. If you have any question, please ask them. Cynthia will send it to me and I will try to answer my best while speaking today. So everybody, I guess, know that definition of knowledge translation, which is the CHR1. So a dynamic and iterative process that includes synthesis, dissemination, exchange, and ethically sound application of knowledge to improve the health of Canadians, provide more effective health services and product and strengthen the healthcare system. That is very classic and very well known that basically every researcher put in a grant and every implementer, scientist put in their project. But where I want to bring your attention is in those 2 very important words. That knowledge translation is a dynamic and iterative process. A lot of my colleagues, not in heart disease, but mostly in rehabilitation, think that they have a good idea, they want to change practice, they bring the idea and people will change practice. So obviously it doesn't work that way. Knowledge translation, it's how, or knowledge mobilization, it's how, but an on-off process. Knowledge translation is, as every science, complex, but it is complex because it speaks about changes and the capacity of clinician, of expectation of manager to survive within the health and social system context, which is actually very difficult, full of challenge, ask for resource, etc. So it's not because we had a very good scientific idea and we want to support the people in the clinical practice to change that it will come easily. The people evolve within a context which is especially challenging those times, and we need to take in account and to recognize and to work with that complexity to make sure that we will be able to support the change in the care and services and quality of care for the people with a heart disease. And knowledge translation mostly should be considered as with an ecological perspective, because we often want to change, let's say, OT knowledge about evaluation tool, and because we change one individual knowledge of a tool or an intervention or something like that, we think that that individual would be able to change his or her comportment. But this is more complex than that. People work into context, into program. They have constraints in time and resources. The patient don't always want to put new evidence in practice because they prefer hold the way to do things and stuff like that. So even if we wish to change things just by being like that, this is not the way it works, and it requires a lot of effort, empathy for people's situation, and so on. It's why in the last decade, I would say, we reckon that evidence-based practice is very challenging to individual, and that keeping in mind and respecting the context in which the people evolve is a key to a knowledge translation to be effective. So the most famous models in knowledge translation is the knowledge to action cycle that have been published in 2006 by Jan Graham. And Graham and Hall works have been taken by the CHR just to set the base for knowledge translation. So this article is very, very famous and is cited very often in research, and it's lost in knowledge translation. It's time for a map. So the KTA cycle or the KTA model is a very useful model because it describes the process of doing KT. So it describes the step that you should take, and those steps don't go under one direction. They go back and forth, and we can change. So it's iterative. And this process model include both knowledge production, and that you'll find in the little blue and green funnel, and knowledge implementation, which is the gray circle around knowledge production. If we start just by looking at knowledge production, it encompasses three main steps or three main phases. The first one is knowledge inquiry. So it's basically the primary research that we've done. So you do a randomized control trial in Alberta to try a new medication. So you have one result. You do qualitative interview about experience of people having heart disease in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. So that's one primary research. So every single research that we do produce primary results. The primary results often are synthesized in knowledge synthesis. It might be a systematic review, it might be scoping review, it might be a rapid review. So it's often a review of qualitative or quantitative information. And based on the result of those synthesis, there are knowledge tool and product that are that should be produced. So it can be clinical practice guideline, it can be algorithm, it can be printed educational material also to help people to know better what is being done in research. And you see that the funnel is that way. So we have a lot of primary research. We have a little bit less, but still we have a lot of systematic review. And those time, which is very trendy in knowledge translation, is to do a review of systematic review that called umbrella review. So we review the review that review primary research. And then you have very little knowledge tool and product that draw on that information to produce useful stuff that people can actually get without having to read every scientific stuff behind, and to go to the point of care, to the bed of the people in their home and say, hi, this is how I'm going to help you with that services. So this funnel is really knowledge production. But there's another step that is very important, and which is knowledge implementation, because just doing research, just doing systematic review and to publish clinical practice guideline won't help people to get that tool into their practice, into their context, and to put it in action. And I will bring your attention to the little white arrow here, which is, if you want my opinion, the more important point in the knowledge to action. So that's where the knowledge meets the action, and there where the knowledge user or the researcher have to find a fit between a solution, which is a new intervention, medication, information sheet or something like that, and a clinical problem or a challenge that you meet in your day-to-day work. That, and I will speak later on about that, that is the most important piece where the planet need to be aligned to make sure that implementation will work. But when you have a knowledge tool and it fits a clinical problem, you have to adapt the tool to the context. If you're in Quebec, you have to translate it in French. If you work on home care, you cannot have an evaluation that takes 3 days to be done. So you have to adapt the knowledge to the context, and you also have to assess the barrier and facilitator to its use. What stop us to use a validated tool to validate evidence-based intervention, and what can help us with that regard? Then we had to select, tailor, and implement the intervention. So that's the step that usually people are talking when they talk about knowledge translation. So that's the very little moments where you take the knowledge and you put it in action, but that's only a very small piece. And then you have to make sure that people actually do what they should do, so to monitor, and you have to evaluate if it produced the expected outcome. And after all, you have to keep that practice going until a better one comes. So the knowledge to action cycle, even it seems a bit simplistic, is really a long process, a complex process that takes into account the environment in which implementation should occur. And again, I would say to be good, to be able to implement, you really need to join the triangle and the circle. So you need to find a fit between the solution and the problem. Again, this is a key concept in KITI, the fit between the knowledge that you produce and the problem and context. I used to say, and that's a joke, that one of my emergency doctor keep to say, research is often about finding solution for which you don't have problems. So even if you're a very good experimental researcher, you have your own way, you have your own science, you have your own idea, evidence-based idea, theoretically based idea about what you should develop to improve a certain domain. So I have my idea what to do to improve knowledge translation. Cynthia and you all know what you should do to improve the care to the people who have heart disease. But often we come with a solution, and at the end, maybe the problem doesn't exist anymore. I have a student who works about prioritization of people with traumatic brain injury. And Because of the COVID, so we worked on that problem for 4 years, coming with a very nice tool, very well structured. And because of the COVID, there are no waiting lists anymore. So we don't need to prioritize patients. So we had a solution for which the problem doesn't exist anymore. Or sometimes we think that we should improve that aspect of care to provide that information, and the people just don't need it. So we had a piece of puzzle. We do all that knowledge production, but we don't find a problem for our solution, and that's a big problem. And the opposite is also true. Very often the people who work in the circle, in the context, they're seeking for a solution, but you don't have that solution produced in the funnel. Maybe you have all the primary knowledge produced, but you don't have a synthesis. And if you have a synthesis, do you have a tool that can help the people to just act, to implement actually the knowledge? So the really important thing that I want you to keep in mind in knowledge translation plan is you need to have a fit between the knowledge and the problem or context. So if you want to improve the fit of the knowledge that you produce for a given problem, you can work into integrated knowledge translation. So basically we have two, we call it mode. There are two philosophy behind knowledge translation that work for two sets of problems. So you can either work with the people who have the problem or the challenge or live at this situation to precise what is the problem that you want to work on with them, to see what could be the better methods to produce the required knowledge, to interpret the result with them, and to find useful and actionable tool for them in their practice. That is called integrated knowledge translation. That means that the people who are going to buy your research result at the end of the day, you work with them at most of the steps, not all the steps. From my experience, people are not very interested in qualitative or quantitative analysis. They prefer to look at the result with you, discuss it. And you have another mode of knowledge translation, which is end of grant knowledge translation, which is also good. So you do a research, let's say you do a very complex RTC with medication and or very fundamental work. And then you come to some result that you need to send to the good people, to the people who are gonna use it. So that is do and disseminate the result of research to a defined audiences. That is end of grant knowledge translation. So whenever you talk about doing knowledge translation, you have to choose one of those two religions. What do I want to do it with the user, or do I want to do something more, I would say, systematic or robust, but it's not the way, the good way, or some more classical research design, and do the dissemination at the end of the grant only. So when you speak about integrated KT, you do it with the knowledge user. And as you work with people with heart disease, those people face many challenges in organizing their life, with fatigue, with sometimes cognitive issue, with language issue, with understanding the scientific vocabulary and process. So working with knowledge user is challenging, and it's challenging for the researcher and a very personal plan. I'm working with people with traumatic brain injury, and when I come to develop a tool to help them with their sexuality, and the people come to me, and I have a big grant to do that, and they look at me and say, well, we don't need your tool, we don't need your research, we're doing sexually perfectly fine, and they just leave the room. So that's the kind of problem that you can face when you do integrated knowledge translation. But at the end of the day, if you can discuss with the people, have a good dialogue, if you can hear them pretty well, you come to very good fit between the knowledge and the user. So integrated knowledge translation, you're doing the knowledge translation while doing the project. So let's say that you do a clinical research about an intervention in physical therapy. You talk with the user, with the physical therapist, but also the occupational therapist and the manager and the clients to determine what is the best intervention. So you choose either to evaluate its effectiveness or to explore the perception of patient and provider with that intervention. And that integrated knowledge translation involves often implementation, which is active effort within a real context and tool. So because we work with knowledge user, it's very rare that those knowledge users say, well, a scientific article will meet my need very nicely. So often we need to create tool, one pager, infographics, or a webinar like this one. So this is a type of knowledge translation that you could expect if you do integrated knowledge translation. The end of grant KT is done independently from the knowledge user. So they're not involved in the process, which is mainly led by scientific. And it often occurs at the end of the project, once all the knowledge have been produced, collected. So the knowledge user cannot say, well, your question is not precise enough. I prefer you to use quantitative method to be sure about the effectiveness of that medication or that intervention. And so they don't have any regard on what you're doing. And end of grant KT often involve diffusion of information or dissemination. So we send article, we send fact sheet to physical therapists or occupational therapists or manager to inform them about what we found. So if you ask me to say the thing in other words, I would say integrated knowledge translation is challenging. It's very hard on researcher ego. It's costly because you need to work very collaboratively with people to ask and to consider their opinion. It is not always feasible. Sometimes the research process is too fast, too difficult. The people cannot come to help you, so it's not always feasible. But it produces very relevant results because you're working the funnel just to make sure that you hit the X, you meet the need of the user. It's very gratifying because you see people going with their knowledge translation tool, their results, and they disseminate it into their organization and Facebook and stuff like that. And it facilitates the fit between the knowledge and the process. The end of grant knowledge translation is also challenging. But it requires less interaction with people. You have a little bit more control. So you don't have to take in account opinion and wishes and stuff like that. So you can do your own stuff. For researcher, it shows more cost benefit because from an academic point of view, it is important for a researcher to have articles published, to have line on their CV. So for me, it requires less effort and it produces more line on my CV. So end of grant KT is also sometimes good for some situations. But end of grant KT is also necessary and it's useful because it addresses the need of a special category of knowledge user, that is researcher, scientific community, and clinician who devote time to read a scientific publication. And I know that clinicians don't always have the time or the interest or the even the connection to be able to get those articles. So as most of you have a clinical experience from what I heard, you see that KT in heart disease is challenges, and it creates real unique challenges, and that's a very interesting field to work in. First, the nature of the knowledge is not always the same than in very classical medical science. If you work on, let's say, a headache and you want to improve headache with aspirin, you have cohort of people, of 1,000 people, and you can test intervention, and everybody is the same, and aspirin is the same for everybody, and everybody can be in Quebec City or in Toronto or in Vancouver, to say something. So you have more uniform, more coherent problem with solution, which is not the case for the knowledge that are relative to heart disease. Sometimes the knowledge is very explicit, but it's also very tactic. The people have the knowledge inside them. You have to ask them for the knowledge. Sometimes it's rare. Sometimes you cannot do systematic review. Sometimes, so the knowledge is not the same. What's come in the funnel, it's different. The format of the knowledge is different, and tools often only apply to a few individuals. If you're working with people with asthma, you can ask for a lot of money, because you're sure if you're doing asthma control diary, a lot of people will use it. But if you're doing, let's say, sexual control tool, just to make sure that the people are happy with their sexual relations, stuff like that, because they have heart disease, there would be only a small number of people going to use it. So that makes more difficult to do the knowledge translation and to produce a sufficient number of tools. The contexts are particularly variable. So people with heart disease, yes, they need rehabilitation, but they also live in a community, and various community, where often only one individual or two have that disease. There you have sparse knowledge user. It's not all the doctor or nurses or occupational therapists that will need the knowledge that you produce. And the monitoring, sorry, my French come through the presentation. So the monitoring and outcome measurement are often anecdotic, because you have too small sample. It's very difficult to have a robust trial. So how you can face those challenges and still doing very interesting and powerful knowledge translation, because you need that answer. So you get back to Ian Graham, very wise sentence. When you're lost in knowledge translation, it's time for a map. It's time for a plan. So here it's a tool that I love, and I'm sorry that I only have it in French, it haven't been translated. It speaks about how complex knowledge translation can be. So you have in green what you should transfer. Sometimes it's explicit knowledge. Sometimes it's systematic review result. Sometimes it's more diffuse. Sometimes it's in scientific article. Sometimes it's in a flyer or more different form. So knowledge translation plan, you need to explain what you're going to transfer. What is the key message? What can be the Twitter message that you send and you want to send under which form? Scientific article, you want to do something more sophisticated, you want to use virtual reality, so you need to think about what you're going to bring to the people. And in red, you see that you need to think about why you want to bring that information. Maybe you just want to inform them. You want them to have some type of knowledge of what you've done, but not that much. Sometimes you want to change their attitude. You maybe have noted that I'm speaking a lot about sexuality in context of rehabilitation. It's because I want to change people's attitude around that. We often speak about the physical therapy or medication, that is perfectly fine. But when I speak about sexuality, I want to change people's attitude. I want them to be more receptive, to be able to speak about that more freely. So sometimes you want to just change knowledge. Sometimes you want to change the attitude of people, or more often you want to change their practice. And practice is the more challenging change that you can do in knowledge translation because you work on the people knowledge, then it comes to the heart. They have to make sure that they're able to do that change, to do that practice, that this is good for the clients, that their colleague would be happy with that. So changing a comportment is a very high level KT effort. And then you have to talk who is the good knowledge user for you. Maybe it's the clients themselves, maybe it's the clinician, maybe it's the decision maker. You have to think who is in your team, who have collaborated in your research effort, and who can help you to bring that information. Then the only small step in the KT plan, in blue here, you have to think how you will do it. Maybe you will do printed educational material. Maybe you will do a workshop. Maybe you will do train-the-trainer strategy. So you have to think and to find evidence-based strategy that would help you to make those knowledge user go. And then in purple, you have to evaluate the outcome of that knowledge translation effort. So a knowledge translation plan is a systematic way to identify first, what is the knowledge that you want to translate into practice, with whom, the partner, engaged or not, the patient, clinical partner, and who is the knowledge user. Sometimes it's only the scientific industry or the medical student or rehabilitation student or people that are involved in social service care. What is the best strategy to reach a knowledge user? What do you want to change with them, and what do you need for? And to come to this goal, there's very useful tool that have been developed. And if you just Google knowledge translation plan, you will find a lot of templates available on internet. But I suggest this one, which is Melanie Barwick one, and she's working in St. Michael Hospital in Toronto. And with that plan, you can only tick and give notes about who are the project partner, how you want to engage them, what are their roles, who are the knowledge, expertise, etc. So I strongly suggest you just to get a peek within knowledge translation planning template. There are a few of them. Those who work in Quebec, you have INSPQ, who have some in French, and choose the one that you're most used to work with, so to develop your plan. So I hope that I give you something of a robust overview of knowledge translation process, either end of grant or integrated, that you see better how to articulate the knowledge production and the knowledge implementation, that you see that complex, that hard is here create complexity within knowledge translation, and that I only overview a few of those challenges to help you to create a good knowledge translation plan. And you can use those templates either within a grant submission or just into a clinical practice to improve the knowledge of the people and to try to change attitude and stuff like that. So you can use those tools in research or in practice to improve knowledge translation. So I hope I have a few minutes in advance. So if you have any question, I would be happy to try to answer them.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for a clear and very informative presentation. There is a question. In terms of integrated KT, what is the difference between integrated KT and patient research partnerships? When patient research partners work on research, what's the difference between those two concepts?
Yeah, integrated KT doesn't always work with patient, okay? So patient-oriented research is a research where you take into account the needs and preference of the patient at each step. Often you have patient partner involved with you, but it's strictly for the patient, and it's informed by a lot of theory, and it's a question of values. When it comes to integrated knowledge, you might work with a government, which is not a patient. You might work with therapists, you might work with community-based worker. So that is a bit larger. But I have to say that those research movements where you try to work closer with the knowledge user, they are all related in some sense. So you have participatory research, that is also a type of integrated knowledge translation. So there's a lot of denomination for that type of research where you work closer to the user. But patient-oriented, it's most about the patient, their need, what they want to, what are the priority, while integrated knowledge translation can be with other knowledge user and can be less about what they need, but about how we can fit the knowledge to a context. I don't know if that answered the question.
No, that was great. The other question is, how early are you connecting with these knowledge users? And the question is, thinking about the concept for today was setting up the basics. Oftentimes when we're writing proposals for research grants, is it at that time point that you are also engaging with knowledge users?
Well, I would suggest to engage with them very, very early before you state the research objective and the research question. That asks a lot of time, and I think that's a very strategic period of time where you want to engage with the people, so you're sure that your research question orientation is very well aligned with the need of the knowledge users. So I suggest to do it before. So that's my dream answer. But in the fact, often you have a proposal, you have to do it quick, you do a quick meeting with people, okay, that's interesting, you do a proposal, and then we refine. So what I do very often is that we do a first draft together. We're happy with both globally happy with both the question and the method that we will take. And then when you get the money, because you always get the money, you come back to the user and say, okay, we will refine the question. We will make sure that we catch everything that we need to catch. And there's the method still okay for you. So I would suggest to do it as fast as I can. And another thing is that it's not everybody that like to work on every step of a research process. So often the people would say, well, I'm not interested in data collection. I'm not interested in analysis. I'm not interested. Ask your question, then I'm going to help you later. So it's very important to hear and to respect what your knowledge user can put into the integrated knowledge translation process and to make the most of it.
Wonderful. The other question here is, what is the role of social media and knowledge translation, and how do you build that into your plan?
Well, that is a very interesting question because it's a novel tool in knowledge translation. Traditionally, let's say 15 years ago, when I started my PhD career, we don't use social media at all because it's for people who don't know about research. And knowledge translation was mostly about writing scientific article and to send them to doctor or to researcher. Worst case, we can send it to clinician, but it's not always good. So it's a new tool that reach a new audience. For example, community-based organizations very often have either Twitter, LinkedIn, or a Facebook account, and you can send them information. So people often read that, and there even a science behind that. It's called altimetric. So it's all the metrics of knowledge dissemination, I would say, how they reach the user. So when you use social media, you have to think that the target user would be different. It's not all the people. It's well known that people with disability, at least for those with cognitive disability, they don't use social media as in the same way than people without disability do. And you have to think that the format of information is very different. So if you want to catch information, the people to catch the information, that they are confident in that, you need to take a very great care to the forum, how you present the information, to make sure that they are confident that the research behind the tweet or the post is robust. And there's a few strategies that you can use to improve that knowledge translation tool. So I would say consider it as a strategy to reach funky audiences. And you cannot just put an article into Facebook and to think that it will reach your audiences the way you know, like you want to. So there's some tool that you need to adapt to make sure that the knowledge meet the audience's need and way to use social media.
Wonderful. Another question here is, you've really highlighted the value and benefits of using integrated knowledge translation plans. But we have some researchers and clinicians on the line who are in early career stages and are aware of this publish and perish ideology or principle. And so are KT plans a marker for evaluating performance, especially if you're on a 10-year track? Are you seeing a change in your career?
Yeah, what I do to avoid that issue, and I have to say that I'm not, I'm still under the publish or perish challenge myself. So how I try to address that is I try to work both ways. So let's say that I'm writing a grant. I try most of the time, and I would say it's very rare that I don't involve the knowledge user in my research. I say in a first paragraph, I will do integrated knowledge translation with my user. I will work with them. I will ensure they meet our need. I will ensure that they are listened to. Then I will also do end of grant KT. So because it's a different public, you know, when you want to read clinician and practitioner, you don't use integrated, you don't use end of grant knowledge translation. Those people would be better suited with integrated knowledge translation. But when you want to reach scientific audience, to publish article, to do international conference, then you do end of grant knowledge translation. So a good practice is to describe both. I will work with knowledge user that way, and at the end of the project I will publish 3 articles, I will do a webinar, and I will do that stuff. So you can do both modes, but the 2 modes don't target the same user and don't do the same outcome, I would say.
Wonderful. There's a comment here, acknowledge the challenges of doing KT in rare diseases. In our case, with neuromuscular disorders, which can be rare and sometimes framed as ultra rare, and also the additional time that is required to do KT is the comment here. I don't know if you wanted to add to that or address the timing.
Well, I would say that I have a lot of fun to discuss with Cynthia, because rare disease is very special one. You have great need. You don't have a lot of resources, as other people don't have a lot of resources either. So I think we need more researchers in KT working only in rare disease to make sure that we have strategies that are maybe less costly, maybe that fit the right target user. Let's say the family doctor. If you need to inform family doctor about which test should be used with your patient, how can we reach only those 25 family doctor within all those one working in Canada? Sometimes it's with patient-mediated knowledge translation. So you give the knowledge to the patient and he bring it to the doctor. That's a way to do it, and it's cheap, but it still work. But definitively, rare disease is a context where the general dynamic of knowledge translation that have been created for white doctor working with migraine or with low back pain doesn't work. We need to be more creative. We need to be more effective also, because you cannot just send the information to everybody in Canada, and those who need the information will pick it. So I think that field will grow in the next years, definitively.
That's wonderful. Another question here, just going back, what's the difference between knowledge translation, knowledge mobilization, and implementation science? Are we talking about the same thing?
No, we don't speak about the same term, but they're interrelated. Knowledge translation, it's a whole term. We don't use it anymore. We use knowledge mobilization first thing. And within knowledge mobilization, you have the diffusion of information. So it's basically to send the information in the air to everybody, putting a tweet or putting something on Facebook. You have dissemination, which is sending the information, but it's still a push strategy, that you push the information to the good people. Let's say you send it to all occupational therapists through occupational therapist board. You send it to a university professor. You send it to a very targeted group of people, but it's also a push strategy. In that sense, that you don't know if those people have the problem or face the problem. You don't know their context, but you're taking the information and you send it that way. Implementation is somewhat different because it's speak about going into a context, taking an information and making sure that the people implement it, do it. So you have to do training, you have to monitor, you do audit and feedback. So it required more active involvement from implementer, which is researcher, which is other people, and it's very time consuming, but it produced more targeted result. I would say it result in behavior change, and more than if you only send the information through a mail or stuff like that. So you have knowledge mobilization. Within that, you have dissemination, and you have diffusion, and you have implementation, which is very more active and more intense.
Very good. So on that note, why don't we go ahead and end today's webinar? Thank you so much for this really informative, really insightful webinar. Stay tuned for our next KT webinar and stay in touch with NMD4C. On behalf of Muscular Dystrophy Canada and the Neuromuscular Disease Network for Canada, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We welcome you to contact MDC if you're looking for knowledge users. We have worked with researchers on their knowledge translation plans and to continue to provide ideas to NMD4C on really supporting your KT activities. Thank you all so much. Great to see some positive comments on how much you've learned this afternoon. Thank you and have a great day.